Hello, welcome to the show. I'm Gigi Kopilak. This show is sponsored by the Pleasantville Garden Club. My guest today is Carol Durst-Wertheim. I first met Carol at the Garden Club when she came to give a demonstration and presentation about tulips in Holland, which led to a discussion about sustainable farming and eating locally. It just gives you a little idea of her versatility and multi-dimensions. I'm very delighted to have Carol with us today. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you very much, Gigi, for having me.
Well, we're really glad you're here. So let's talk about what you're doing now, because I think we ended up that discussion that day on sustainable farming, and I think that's what you're interested in now, is it?
Well, when we were talking there about the tulips, we started to talk about what else I'm doing, and a lot of what I have been doing lately is speaking in the community about buying food locally, about teaching our children what they should be eating, the difference between organic foods and local foods. And I've also been very involved in just getting the public to think more consciously about what they're eating and buying.
Okay, so you are a food industry professional. In fact, I think you even got as far as the White House with your industry.
I have a kind of diverse background, and I was invited to the White House in June of 2010. Michelle Obama started a campaign to try to address children's obesity. And in June, she invited a number of chefs from different culinary associations to come to the White House lawn and to say, chefs, go to the schools, get into the schools. And from June 1910, it took me about a year, but
2010.
2010,
You're much younger than that.
2010, sorry. I managed to find my way into the Yorktown schools, and I found my way into the Pocantico Hills School. I spoke in Pocantico to some teenagers about possibilities for interesting careers in the food industry, just part of my background. And in Yorktown, I spoke with kindergartners about what does it mean to make lemonade with fresh mint and honey in it instead of buying a canned soda.
Right.
So it's kind of the range of my interests are with a lot of different people and just getting people to start to think about what are we putting into our bodies and where does it come from.
Right. And so you mentioned chefs, but are you a chef? You're not really a chef, are you?
Well, I am actually.
Oh, okay.
I'm a trained chef, but that kind of takes me back to several career changes ago, if you will.
Right, because you started out totally different.
I began as an art person. As a kid, I used to fill in those little coloring
Did you stay
pictures.
in the lines? Did you stay in the lines? Did you stay in the lines in those coloring books?
Well, I must have, because they started to give me awards for it. From when I was like 7 years old, I won a sweater at a local children's store, and then I had scholarships to Pratt Institute on Saturdays while I was in high school. And I was really aiming toward having a fine art career. Finished high school, I did some commercial art for a while at the W.T. Grant Company, and then I went to college. And while I had a wonderful art teacher, Linda Novak, in high school, who was very exciting and made art just so much fun, when I began college, I had an art teacher who asked all the young women who were taller than 5'7" to model for him privately. So by the second semester of my freshman year, I was no longer an art major.
It's your story is such a women's story from those times and what we.
It was true. It happened to a number of us.
Because there was no recourse for you to do anything.
No,
and say, no, it was either do this.
Well, I continued on, and I actually graduated with interdisciplinary degree. It actually says on my college diploma, 20th Century Thought and Expression.
Okay.
And I wound up doing my senior year at the New School for Social Research in New York, studying with people like Chaim Gross and Isaac Sawyer, of the three Sawyer brothers.
Right.
And then I was looking for work, and what am I going to do? And I'm 22 years old in New York, so I found my way up to Teachers College at Columbia University, and I said, well, I really like working with adults, didn't want to work with little kids at that point. And I said, I really like being in a learning environment. And those were two pieces of information. And I walked up to the information desk and I said to the guard, this is what I'm thinking. And he sent me to the Department of Higher and Adult Education, which made a lot of sense. And I took a master's degree there and went on toward women's career counseling.
Okay.
I started to say, this was in my early 20s, and a fellow named Richard Nelson Bowles was giving workshops. He later wrote What Color is Your Parachute, which he's re-edited every year since. But I had the privilege of learning from him just as he was first getting this book organized and published. And it totally informed my thinking about work and my career.
So you mentioned that this is women's studies. We're still not in food yet, even though women and food sound like they go together, but no.
It wasn't even women's studies then.
Oh,
it
okay.
wasn't even women's studies then. It was 20th century thought and expression,
Okay.
which was equal credits in literature, history, sociology, studio arts, all kinds of things got put under that rubric.
But am I wrong? Do you end up working with women then?
I did after the master's degree.
Okay.
Because I started career counseling at Hofstra University, and I was assigned to all the young women who had trained to be teachers, and they all wanted to go back to their elementary schools to be teachers, but their elementary schools were being closed at that time.
Wow.
This was the mid-70s, and there was a consolidation and shrinkage in the young population on Long Island at that point. So I went from there to Catalyst, which was a not-for-profit organization, where I was a research associate on a FIPSE grant, which is a fund for the improvement of post-secondary education, attempting to address what was happening for undergraduate women on campus. And lo and behold, my story was not unique. And many other young women wound up getting to college and never taking the math courses, which were prerequisites to all the more lucrative careers in engineering, in architecture, in all the professions.
Because
you had to have math.
Right, because there was a theory that women were just going to go through college and then get married and have children and not have a career.
And this was just as that was cusping to women's liberation. And I was at a women's college called Kirkland College at the time, which was sponsored by Hamilton College. And after 10 years, they pulled the financial plug on Kirkland College and made Hamilton co-ed. So I have the distinction of outliving my alma mater.
Okay.
However, I met some wonderful, powerful women there and had great women faculty members there and started to ask, gee, why don't I have my kind of career and my career commitment? Why don't I have those opportunities? So that kind of informed the choices that I made in my 20s.
So what you learned when you were in college at this Kirkland College, you are transferring now to the Hofstra students and saying to them, get a career, think about
work more broadly than teacher, nurse, secretary, which were really the prescribed roles.
Absolutely.
And that was just breaking down in the 69 to 72 era.
Right.
And so I was going on, and I went further. I had my master's degree, and then after Catalyst, I moved to the New York State Department of Labor to coordinate a displaced homemakers program. And at the time, the definition was being formed and the laws are being passed. The program still exists today, and I'm happy to see that. It's basically for midlife women who found themselves needing to get back into the labor market. And they'd taken a hiatus in order to raise their families, and they were told, the man in the house will take care of everything. And lo and behold, they were, forced into the labor market because of the death, divorce, or disability of the spouse. And women start to see that more and more in the 70s and 80s and began to react a little differently and understand that we did need to prepare to work around the children or with flex time around the children or in other ways.
And so you were coordinating this for I understand you weren't even in Long Island anymore. You were all the way in Tom's River doing this, and you were all over.
And when I joined the State Department of Labor, I actually was on the 72nd floor of the World Trade Towers.
Oh, interesting.
And then traveled around the state where there were 10 centers, and I got to write a CETA grant to increase the funding for those centers. But it was a lot invested in women, opening women's careers and opening up opportunities for women who needed to work or work differently.
And then I think just about now you're starting to get into the food industry yet?
Well, I ran a conference and 700 people attended, and there were all kinds of workshops. And one of the sponsors of the conference was a fellow named Bill Lederman, whose mother knew me from deans and counseling women in college. And Adele Kaplan said, Bill, get her. And Bill hired me to create what became the New York Restaurant School, which initially was a program at the New School, back in the New School for Social Research, and it was offered for 12 college credits. It was an 18-week program teaching cooking, baking, and restaurant management. We had a restaurant on site. It was on 34th Street, just down the block from Macy's. We took off in the middle of a construction site, and 5 months later we doubled the size of the program, and it was going great guns. And one of the special programs I had the chance to develop while I was there was a particular baking program for hearing impaired people. And I was able to bring in Gabe Grayson, who's an American Sign Language interpreter.
I think we have a couple of images.
You probably do.
Is he in this image, this
Yeah,
first
Gabe
image?
is actually on the right side, signing to the audience. In the middle is Nick Malgeri, who's a renowned baking instructor in New York. And to his left is the instructor who was assisting Nick in covering the class. The second shot
How
shows
does that
the
work?
students.
I imagine that would be so hard to be watching and then cooking at this.
Well, the restaurant industry really requires all of your senses and phenomenal timing.
Okay.
Baking can be done off the line. It doesn't demand that a la minute cooking and attention and hearing. You can sense when a bread is done if you tap it and you hear it's hollow.
Right.
But that's a sense that a hearing impaired person may not have. So teaching the techniques and the hand skills for the baking preparation that could be done in advance of service was what we were going after.
Okay, that's excellent.
And we had support from the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation to do it. And it was a really interesting project to try to offer that.
What is the second image? Is that the class? Is that a picture
Those are
of
the students, some of our graduates.
That's fabulous. Yeah.
And then after I conducted the 16th graduation of the Professional Restaurant School Training Program, I said, they're having more fun than I'm having. So I resigned as the director, and I came in the next morning, Monday morning, in my white uniform as a student in the program.
Okay.
And the faculty were sure I was just trying to get one more evaluation on them.
Oh,
and
they
I
thought you were
said,
there to spy?
No, I was spying. I said, no. I'm done with the role of school marm, and now I'm going to go in and out on my own.
How fascinating. Yeah.
And 2 weeks.
So that just through 18 weeks?
18 weeks of professional, intensive culinary and baking training. And I launched 2 weeks later with a cocktail party for 300 after I graduated. And I hired all my classmates because that's who I knew best in the industry.
Right.
And we started a catering business.
So was it, okay, we have some images here of you.
Yeah, some of them were informal, some of them more formal.
Yeah.
One of the shots you actually have my husband in the middle of the picture there.
Okay.
And
that's the shot. Well, first of all, there's a shot of you
kitchen
in the
prepping.
kitchen prepping, and we also have your business card. So that was what you were. You were the New American Caterers.
I began as New American Catering, and after a few years, I incorporated. So I became New American Catering Corp.
Okay.
And there is a subtle difference in the business cards, but you could see how I was progressing, and the business was growing and thriving. And one of the things that I always did in this business was to deliver a little bag of homemade treats between Thanksgiving and Christmas to my favorite customers.
Oh.
So I had about a dozen little truffles and cookies, and it was hand-delivered by the service staff during those few weeks. And invariably, that was the only marketing gambit I ever did. It was a kiss to my favorite customers, and it always generated holiday parties. Someone had forgotten to book the caterer. Always generated parties.
It's interesting.
And that led me into an opportunity to write a cookbook, actually.
Oh, okay.
Which is
yeah, we skipped. Let's go back once. While you're at the New York Restaurant School, wasn't there one of the books there? No. Okay,
not
sorry.
until I got
Not
out
until you
catering.
All right. Oh, okay.
Because while I was catering, I was also teaching then at Peter Kump's Culinary School. And I was teaching people about careers in the culinary arts and how to open businesses
All right,
in the food industry.
So you're doing more than just catering.
Sure.
You're writing a book.
Then I started to write the book.
And you're teaching it somewhere else. All right. I just want to show some of the images from your catering though, because
Sure.
you have one there that's very exciting. You did a buffet, I guess, at MoMA.
Yes, for the Weight Watchers organization. They
Oh,
were
that's so
celebrating
interesting.
their, I guess it was their 20th anniversary. So there were 600 of them going to be at the Museum of Modern Art. And it was rather a challenge to set up a buffet and visuals that could hold up against the space in the lobby and the huge, sculptures that are
And make
there.
it healthy and not fattening. Besides, yeah,
Well,
wow.
eggs and tea. Yes.
All right. So now you're catering, and which is the book you write at this point?
I wrote a book. I knew you were coming, so I baked a cake. Okay. And it was a title that comes, actually, it's a play off a song that my mother used to sing to me in the 1950s.
Clooney. If I knew you were coming. Okay, let's not do that.
It used to drive me nuts. But obviously, since I was going to write a dessert book, that was the only title. So I altered the words a little bit so that it was mine, and that came out in 1997. Simon & Schuster published that.
And it's filled with recipes from?
Well, it was supposed to be 70 recipes. It's got 140 recipes of all kinds of homemade and very simple and very family-friendly desserts, because I love desserts, and nobody's got the time to make all kinds of ornate things unless you're doing that professionally.
Right.
And I just said, no, this is more for, how do you get homemade across to the kids?
Yeah. Oh, no, this is not the one. This is, because there were other books that I read that I wanted those recipes. I wanted to get home and make those food.
That was one that came later.
That was
when
one
I
that
started to write what I call food memoir writing, which is a fairly new genre that's on the increase right now, because all of us have associations with food through our families. I took my associations a little bit further in terms of the catering business and then, my particular cookbook. But just a couple of years ago, I was able to contribute an essay about a family recipe for zemmel, which is a sweet treat, a little bit like a regala, but with a yeast dough.
All right, and that was in the book.
Storied dishes.
That's in the storied dishes. Okay,
yes.
Right.
Now that's the current tense of what kinds of stuff I'm working on now.
Right. Okay.
After the catering business, I also had some time teaching at universities. I was down at NYU in their food studies program for about 6 years. And while I was there, I decided I am going to write a doctorate. I'm going to go back and pick up a stitch from my early 20s that I didn't have a chance to do, and started to work on my doctorate.
Okay, I forgot to introduce you as PhD.
That's quite all right. I often forget it myself.
Doctor, I should call you doctor.
Nah.
No.
Along the way, though, while I was catering and teaching, I also had recipes that I tested on behalf of other authors, and I submit recipes for different contests, and one was taken into a book called the Gardener's Community Cookbook, which was put out by Smith & Hawkins. So I've always been, a little bit affiliated with gardening before we met at the gardening club.
So which recipe was in that you?
In the Gardener's Community Cookbook is something called chicken provençal, which was a recipe that I used a lot in catering, and it worked. They picked it up. For the cookbook.
I wonder, do they test their recipes before they choose?
In this book, they did.
Yeah, okay.
In this book, they did, because they had a professional woman who actually edited all of them and ran the contest.
Okay.
Another one of the things I've done is vetted recipes for baking contests and running the contests themselves and making all the recipes that were the finalists and running the judging and stuff like that.
What fun.
It's a lot of fun. I love that kind of stuff.
But they provide the kitchen for you, or do you do this on your own?
It depends on who's hiring you to do that kind of thing. I was hired at one time by Tefal, which manufactures some baking equipment.
Right.
And they asked me to read the recipes. They had hundreds of them. I read them at home. I tested the finalists in a professional kitchen with crew. And then they had judges brought together to taste the final products for the selections.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's a little bit complicated in there.
Yeah. Do you find that your palate has changed from testing so many recipes and doing?
I started out with a pretty good palate, apparently, and then I did some wine training, and with all the culinary training.
Why am I surprised?
What you learn about your palate, your tongue doesn't actually mature when you're a kid, only as an adult. And then the more things that you taste, the more taste memory you develop.
Interesting.
It's very difficult for me to explain to someone the taste of fresh tarragon. But if you've once tasted fresh tarragon, you know what I'm talking about.
Parakeet food. Seriously, that's exactly what I think of. The smell. It's so interesting you mentioned tarragon, because I remember my parakeets. They must. I don't. But I think that what's interesting about that is I think when babies spit out the food the first time, you've got to give it to them again. They're not really saying they don't like it. It's just so new to them.
I think that's true. I don't know enough about babies' palates. I do know about adult palates.
Okay.
And I do know that most adults, if you offer them something that's really good, whether it's a local ingredient or a fresh bite of a cookie that's just been homemade, people know it. They absolutely know good. It doesn't matter what culture they've come through, it doesn't matter what they've eaten before, but when you give somebody something really good, we know it. We just do.
I think this is an interesting discussion. I'd love to have it with you one day, because I think that culture does have a big part. I mean, my culture is polenta. That's cornmeal. I love it. But you say to someone else, do you want some polenta? And they go, what? Corn? You know? So.
But when it's well made, and if it's seasoned properly, and if it's fresh out of the oven.
Yeah, maybe.
And fragrant.
Yeah, but see, I could eat it like this, you know, just stir it up.
I could too, and I do.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point. That the combinations of things that you put, a lot of butter, always works.
Always works. But that's the fat which is carrying the flavor, actually.
Yeah.
So there's the juggling act now. Everybody is a little fat phobic. And we need some fat. If you don't give a baby fat, you're not helping the baby develop the brain cells that that child will need. So there's good fats and there's less good fats, and how much of that you really do need to consider. And I think a lot of the media sells us these messages of fat-free is the best, fat-free. It's not the best thing. It's really not.
I think everything is turning around. I just read an article, vitamins are not good for you now.
Well, because some people's digestive tracts can absorb the vitamin or the nutrition from a pill, and someone else can't absorb it. So
but also, I wonder if people are not eating,
thinking they're taking their vitamins, and it doesn't work.
No.
It does not work.
You have to eat all these foods. So is this the kind of thing that you're teaching now? I mean, have we gone through all your books? I don't want to skip a book. Did we do the food and?
There's two more I'll mention.
Oh, okay, good.
One is that I was nutty enough in my catering escapades to cater my own wedding. And some of the photos from my own wedding were included in a book of wedding styles.
Okay.
And if they'd not been included there, I would have denied that I had catered my own wedding, because I had like no memory of the wedding until years later. I was so over the top. And then through the years of
how could you
teaching,
do that? You're getting married and catering the wedding.
Well, I had my staff were in the kitchen. You know, the day
Did they come out and say, "Tell me what to do"? Or,
no. I went into the kitchen before I joined the party. After the ceremony, you sort of leave and you come back in again. And I just parked in the kitchen to open the first bottle of champagne.
Oh, okay. That was a good idea.
That's what you do. And the earlier training, my master's degree in counseling, came up again through the years that I was catering and teaching, because I would talk to people about their work in the food industry, what they really wanted to do. And a lot of the culinary schools sort of track the students. You learn to cook, you go to a line of a restaurant, you cook on the line of the restaurant, you'll become a chef in the restaurant. And that's only one track. And very frequently that doesn't work for many people. So what happens is people have gone through this training and then they kind of wash out of the industry before they've really tried on the range of what's available. And I would talk to people about one of these other kinds of work. Like, I personally have been paid for more than 24 different kinds of work in the food industry. And always talking to people about their food work warranted my having a book about food industry careers dedicated to me. It was written by a colleague named Barbara Sims Bell, and the second edition she decided to dedicate to me.
That was nice.
Because I was always talking to people about find another way in the industry, find a way to make your contribution to this industry. We really need to find other ways of working. And today I'm actually seeing more women working in the sustainable movement. I'm seeing more women saying, wait a minute, what's going on at the farm market? What are we feeding our children? Women are really taking major leadership roles.
Which is a new
thing
thing, because
Yes,
but
it
there's
is.
still a very small percentage of women in the food industry.
Well, actually, in the food industry, when you look at cafeterias and you look at school lunchrooms and you look at corporate dining rooms, 55% of the food industry workforce is female, but less than 10% are the chefs, are actually running the businesses, and that's out of kilter to me. I don't think that's quite right. So I was on the board of the Women Chefs and Restaurateurs Association for a few years, and I kept saying, I have to do something about this. So I worked on mentoring, and now I'm co-chair of their scholarship and professional development program. And we give about 40 or 42 scholarships each year, not just to culinary schools, but there are opportunities for women to go to Scotland for a month and learn how to open a B&B on an organic farm. We have opportunities in France and in Ireland. We have opportunities with different restaurants and farmers.
Do you have to be young to do this?
Oh, no, actually not. These are greater opportunities for women who have, mostly women, who have 10 years, 5 years experience behind them, who've gone along a certain career path and are now stepping back to say, not exactly what I wanted, what else is there for me in the industry? And these are career changers. These are shift the kaleidoscope by spending a week next to Nora Pouillon down in Washington and see how she does that, see how she runs organic restaurants and businesses.
So interesting. I just want to touch on what you're doing now, because you're giving you do something at the Chappaqua Library.
For the last 7 years, I've run Menus in the Movies, which is once a month at the Chappaqua Library. It's free and open to the public. Coffee is sponsored by the Friends of the Library. Joan Kuhn is the program director there, and she and I work out what theme we're going to do next, and I usually bake something that goes with the theme of the movie we've selected.
When is this happening? I'm coming.
It's one Friday a month, and it's always listed on the website. And this next month, actually in October, I don't know when this will air, but in October, Joan has a whole program going on Mark Twain's Domain, and I'm going to be doing the Ken Burns series, showing Mark Twain's first half of life and second half of life. And obviously I'll hint that the foods or the baked goods are going to be the kinds of baked goods that he would have eaten.
So do the movie reflect the food? Do you pick a movie that shows, like Babette's Feast? Or
We've done those. We've done about 60 different films over the course of 7 years. Some of them were the traditional ones, like Babette's Feast and like Water for Chocolate, Chocolat. And some of them have been more political films about, the shape of water, films on black gold, where coffee is coming out of Kenya, and how this goes on. So some of my interest in food politics, which of course I garnered under Marion Nessel at the NYU Department of Nutrition and Food Studies, that I get to share with the public. And I love that, because to bring something from a book, Food Politics, to a film, to tasting something from that nation, brings together a range of senses and a nice stimulating kind of an evening. Open to the public. Welcome. Please come, Gigi.
So we're almost over. Is there anything else that we forgot to talk about? Thousands and thousands of things, but just if there's one particular thing you want to mention?
The smartest high school teacher I had way back in the 60s said nothing he could teach me would have relevance in the 21st century. The only thing important to know is that you'll need to change. So learn how to adapt to change. And I think that was right.
I think that was you.
He spoke to me.
Thank you so much. This was so
Thank you,
interesting.
Gigi.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching.